Your brother said you were still in Vancouver, my mother said, standing in the doorway of my own condo like she was the one who lived there. She didn't step aside. She didn't apologize. She just held the door at a 4-inch crack, her shoulder braced against the frame, and looked at me the way you look at a delivery driver who's come to the wrong address. Behind her, I could see my dining table. There were cereal boxes on it, 3 of them, and a toddler's jacket draped over the back of my chair. Mom. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Open the door. She sighed. Actually sighed, like I was being dramatic. Keep it down, sweetheart, the baby just went down for her nap. The baby. I didn't have a baby. She slipped out onto the hallway carpet and pulled the door behind her, not quite shut the way you'd step out to talk to a neighbor you didn't want inside. She was wearing her good cardigan, the one she puts on when she wants to seem reasonable. Your brother and Danielle have been going through something, she said. The landlord wouldn't renew their lease. You know how tight the market is in Calgary right now. Even a 1-bedroom is $2,200 a month, and with the new baby, Mom, you have 2 spare rooms, Vivian. There it was. My name in her mouth like a sentence. I have a home office and a guest room, I said. Neither of those is available. She pressed her lips together. Your brother's family was sleeping on an air mattress at our place for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. His daughter doesn't even have a proper bed. You're here by yourself with an entire 2-bedroom and you're talking about a home office. I looked past her at my door. The handle I'd had rekeyed when I moved in. I'd given my parents a spare for emergencies. My building manager's card was in my wallet. I'd used it once when I locked myself out of a run. I was calculating whether I still had his number. Who let you in? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Mom, who let you into my unit? The building manager was very understanding, she said. We explained the situation. He said it wasn't standard procedure, but given the circumstances, I stopped listening after that. Not because I stopped caring, but because a door opened down the hall and my brother stepped out in his socks. His name is Derek. He's 4 years older than me. He has my mother's eyes and my father's talent for standing in a room like the room owes him something. He was holding a coffee mug, one of mine, the blue one with the chip on the handle that I've been meaning to throw out but never do. Hey, he said, like we'd bumped into each other at a Tim Hortons. Vivian. Hey. I looked at the mug. I looked at him. How long? I said. My mother started to answer. I held up a hand. Derek, how long have you been here? He shifted his weight. Just 5 days. We were going to tell you. We just wanted to get settled first, so it wasn't what? So it wasn't a whole thing, he said. He had the nerve to sound slightly defensive. You know how you get. I want you to understand something about my brother. He isn't cruel. That would almost be easier. He is something harder to explain. A person who has spent his entire life believing that the people who love him most are obligated to absorb the consequences of his choices. He didn't break into my condo out of malice. He broke in because somewhere in the architecture of how he was raised, my stability had always been filed under family resources. He wasn't wrong that I had 2 spare rooms. He wasn't wrong that I had 2 spare rooms. He wasn't wrong that his daughter didn't have a proper bed, but he was catastrophically wrong about what that meant. Danielle's inside? I asked. She's nursing, my mum said quickly. She needs rest, Vivian. She had a rough birth and she's exhausted, and the last thing she needs is, I'm not going to yell at her, I said. I stepped past my mother, past my brother, and I walked into my own condo. It smelled different. Not bad, exactly. Baby powder and something microwaved. The blanket from my guest room closet was folded on the couch. My succulent on the windowsill had been moved to make room for a boppy pillow and a small pile of onesies. There was a baby monitor on my kitchen counter. My espresso machine had been pushed to the back corner. Danielle was in the guest room. The door was open a few inches, and I could hear the soft sounds of a newborn eating. I didn't go in. I just stood in my kitchen for a moment, taking inventory of everything that had shifted in 5 days without my permission. My mother appeared behind me. See? It's not so bad. It's temporary. 3 months, maybe 4, just until they can get into subsidized housing. Derek put his name on the list at 3 different buildings. The wait list for subsidized housing in Calgary is 4 years, I said. Silence. Minimum, I added. My mum's expression flickered. She recovered quickly. She is very good at recovering quickly. Well, private rentals. He's looking. He has some leads. Derek was leaning in the doorway now, still holding my mug. I looked at them both. My mother with her reasonable cardigan and her weaponized pity, my brother with his borrowed coffee and his borrowed home. I thought about raising my voice. I thought about calling the building manager right now and having a very different conversation than the one my mum had apparently had with him. I thought about a lot of things, then I thought about something else. I spend my days untangling other people's problems. I work in corporate compliance for an oil and gas firm. Not glamorous, I know. But what it means is that I read contracts the way other people read menus. I know what's enforceable and what isn't. I know the difference between a right and a courtesy. And I know that in Alberta, a person who pays no rent and signs no lease and has been living somewhere for 5 days has a very different legal status than someone who has been there for 5 months. But I also knew something else. If I called the police right now, tonight, what they would see is a young woman trying to remove a newborn and a postpartum mother from an apartment. My building manager had already let them in. My mother would cry. My brother would look wounded, and I would spend the next decade being described at every family dinner I no longer attended as the one who called the cops on a baby. I needed to be smarter than my anger. "You're right," I said. My mother blinked. "I can't have you sleeping here off the books," I said, pulling out a stool at my kitchen island that had a ring on it from someone's takeout container. My condo insurance doesn't cover additional occupants without disclosure. If Danielle had any kind of medical emergency here and she's not listed on my policy, I could be liable. Derek frowned. "We don't need to involve insurance. We're family." "That's not how insurance works," I said pleasantly. I opened my laptop. "But I have a solution. If you're going to be here, we do it properly. I'll add you to my unit as temporary occupants under a sub-license agreement. It protects you. It protects me. Legal, clean, no issues with the building." My mom leaned over. "What kind of agreement?" "Standard stuff," I said. "I have a template. It just documents that you're here with permission, outlines shared use of common areas, that kind of thing. For my records and for the building strata." I was lying about the template. I was writing it from scratch. Here is what I knew and what they didn't. In Alberta, a residential tenancy is established when someone pays rent and has exclusive possession of a dwelling. A sublicense is different. A sublicense is a revocable permission to occupy, like a guest arrangement, and it does not create tenancy rights. If a sublicense ends, the licensee has no legal standing to remain. There's no notice period. There's no residential tenancy dispute resolution service filing. There's just a trespass situation, which the police handle very differently than an eviction. I also knew this the moment I acknowledged them as tenants, accepted any payment, signed anything calling it a lease, or allowed them to establish a pattern of exclusive use. I would need to go through the full eviction process to remove them, months, hearings, documents. So I wasn't writing a lease. I buried the important clauses in the benefits section, the way you bury the thing you actually mean inside the thing people want to hear. Clause 3b. Occupancy is granted as a revocable personal license and does not constitute a tenancy under the Residential Tenancies Act of Alberta. Clause 7a. License may be revoked at any time, for any reason, with 2 hours verbal or written notice. Clause 9c. Licensees consent to 24-hour smart home monitoring of common areas, including kitchen, living room, and entryway for security and insurance documentation purposes. Clause 11. Licensees agree not to receive or redirect mail to this address. That last one, I added because I'd noticed a small stack of envelopes on my counter that hadn't been there when I left for Vancouver. They were addressed to Derek, at my address. He'd been here 5 days. He'd already started using my address. I printed the document on my wireless printer. Here, I said, sliding it across the island. Sign this and you're covered. It also makes it easier if you ever need to prove stable housing for anything. Job applications, that kind of thing. My mother scanned it with the confidence of someone who has never read a contract in her life. This seems very formal. It's just paperwork, I said. It protects Derek and Danielle too. If there's ever any question about whether they had permission to be here, this document answers it. Derek picked up the pen. He flipped to the last page. He looked at the signature line. Does this cost us anything? He asked. No rent, I said. Just documentation. He signed it. Danielle had come out by then, standing in the hallway in my robe, my grey waffle-knit robe that I'd bought myself for my birthday, holding the baby. She didn't sign. She wasn't on the form. She didn't need to be. Derek's signature was enough. Okay, my mum said, visibly relieved. See, this is what happens when you talk like adults. This is all I wanted. I have to get back, I said, checking my phone. Early meeting tomorrow. I'll be in my room if you need anything. I was not in my room. I sat on the edge of my bed with the door closed and I opened the security app on my phone. I'd had the smart home system installed when I moved in 18 months ago. 2 cameras in common areas, a smart thermostat, smart locks on the front door and the storage locker. I'd barely thought about it since. I thought about it now. The kitchen camera showed my mother wiping down my counter, reorganizing things, moving my coffee pods to a different drawer. I watched my home from inside my home and I understood something I had been circling for years without ever landing on it directly. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be the success story that made my family proud, the good job, the condo I'd saved for 4 years to afford the down payment on, the stability my brother had never had. And all of that, every bit of it, had been interpreted by the people who were supposed to be proud of me as an invitation to help themselves. My success was not seen as mine. It was seen as available. I did not sleep much. What I did instead was pull Derek's name through a tenant screening service, which I had authorization to do under Clause 9 of the document he'd signed. What came back was not a surprise, exactly. But it was clarifying. 2 previous rental addresses in Calgary. The first had ended with a mutual agreement to vacate. The landlord's note said Derek had been significantly behind on rent by the time they left. The second address was more recent, an address I recognized because it was the apartment he'd told our parents he'd lost due to a landlord not renewing the lease. The landlord had filed with RTDRS. The file was settled, but the details were there. Derek and Danielle had stopped paying rent 4 months before they left. The landlord had been trying to serve Derek with the hearing notice for 6 weeks before they vacated. There was a judgment amount, just over $19,000 in unpaid rent and damages. Derek hadn't lost his apartment. He'd run from it. And those envelopes on my counter, the ones he'd started redirecting to my address, I was now fairly certain at least some of them were from the collections firm handling that judgment. In the morning, while my mother was making oatmeal in my kitchen and Derek was in the shower and Danielle was feeding the baby, I sat at the island with my laptop and I sent one email. To Derek, his employment as household occupant under the sub-license agreement was terminated, effective immediately on grounds of material misrepresentation, specifically providing false context to obtain the license. He had 2 hours to vacate. He came out of the shower laughing. He actually laughed. You can't evict us, he said. We live here. You'd have to go through the RTDRS. That takes months. You're not a tenant, I said. You signed a sublicense. Read Clause 3B. I don't care what clause you have 2 hours, I said. I've already called the building manager to make him aware that the earlier arrangement is being rescinded. You can't. I turned my laptop around. The security footage. Derek, 30 minutes ago, directing my mother to move my furniture. Danielle, yesterday afternoon, going through the drawers in my home office. My mother, last night, throwing away some of my spice jars because she'd decided they were old. And Derek, on the phone 2 nights ago. The audio was grainy but usable. I turned up the volume. She has no idea, his own voice said. She's so easy. She won't do anything. She never does anything. It's basically ours now. My mother's face went grey. I had not planned this particular part. That recording was something I'd discovered at 2 in the morning when I was going through the footage, and I had decided on the spot to let it exist without telling anyone until exactly this moment. I'm not proud of the way it felt. I am not going to pretend it felt bad either. 2 hours, I said again. What followed was not quiet. My mother cried. Derek argued law at me using terms he'd learned in the last 5 minutes of panic Googling on his phone. He told me I was heartless. He told me I was doing this to a newborn. He stood in my kitchen and called me a bad sister and a bad daughter, and said that our father would be ashamed. I turned the thermostat down to 16 and locked the smart lock on the storage locker, which held 3 of their bags. 2 hours, I said, for the 3rd time. And then I call Calgary Police Service and report unauthorized occupants. The building manager will confirm the license has been rescinded. They will walk you out. That will be a matter of record. That record will follow you to every future rental application you file in this province. Your choice. Here is the thing about people who have spent their lives using guilt as a lever. When the lever doesn't work, they don't have a plan B. My mother sat down on my couch and looked at her hands. Derek went back to the guest room and I heard the sounds of bags being zipped. Danielle came out 20 minutes later with the baby strapped to her chest and her eyes red. She was the only one who didn't say anything to me. She just looked at me for a moment in the hallway, and I don't know what she saw. I hope it wasn't cruelty. I hope she understood that I was not the person who had done this to her family. I hoped that very much, and I didn't say it out loud because it wasn't the moment. What I did do was hand her a piece of paper with 2 phone numbers on it. The first was the City of Calgary's Emergency Family Housing Line. The second was a tenant support organization that helps families navigate the RTDRS process and locate emergency shelter with a newborn. I called ahead, I told her. They're expecting you. She took the paper. I had also, earlier that morning, sent an anonymous tip to the RTDRS collections unit with Derek's confirmed current location so the firm holding the judgment against him could finalize service. He had been dodging that process server for 6 weeks. He stopped dodging it approximately 40 minutes after he left my building. They were gone by noon. I sat in my condo alone for the first time in 6 days, and I listened to the silence of it. The particular silence of a space that is yours. I opened the window in my home office. I made coffee. I moved the Nespresso machine back to its spot. My mother called that evening. I didn't answer. She called again 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail. The message was long. Some of it was angry. Some of it was sad. The part I thought about longest was near the end, when her voice got quiet and she said, "I just don't understand who you became." I understood who I became, though. I became the person who saved for 4 years to buy something that was mine. I became the person who read the fine print. I became the person who, when the people who were supposed to protect her helped themselves to what she'd built, found a way to take it back without screaming, without begging, without apologizing for owning what she'd earned. Derek is, from what I hear through extended family, staying with a friend in Red Deer while he and Danielle figure out next steps. The collection's judgment is being garnished from his wages. He was served properly. Whatever happens next is between him and the choices he made before he ever set foot in my condo. The robe he took out of my closet was still in my hamper. I washed it on the sanitized cycle and hung it back on the hook behind my bathroom door, and it smelled like mine again. I think about something my grandmother used to say. Back when I was small, and she was the one person in my family who seemed to understand that kindness is not the same as unlimited availability. She'd say, "You can love someone and still lock your door." I loved my brother. I probably still do. In the complicated, bruised way you love someone who has disappointed you so completely that the love changes shape. But I locked my door, and I slept better than I had in years. The robe smelled like mine again. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not the legal documents, not the security footage, not the moment Derek's face went white when he heard his own voice on that recording. Just the robe, washed and hung back on its hook, smelling the way it did before any of this happened. I've been thinking about what it actually takes to protect something you built, not the tactics, the sub-license clause, the smart locks, the 2-hour notice, but the deeper thing underneath all of it. The part that's harder to talk about. When my brother walked into my home and decided it was available to him, he wasn't being cartoonishly evil. He was doing what he'd always done. Because no one had ever made it cost him anything. And for a long time, I was part of that system. I stayed quiet at family dinners when the conversation turned to how well I was doing, and I watched the way that information landed, and I told myself it was love. It wasn't love, it was inventory. They were cataloging what I had in case they ever needed it. What changed that night, standing in my own kitchen watching my mother rearrange my coffee pods, wasn't anger. It was clarity. I realized that the most honest thing I could do for myself, and honestly even for Derek, was to stop absorbing the consequences of his choices. Because every time I softened it, every time our parents softened it, we were just delaying a reckoning he was eventually going to have to face anyway. The collections judgment didn't come from me. It came from 4 months of unpaid rent and a landlord he'd been dodging for weeks. I just stopped being the hiding place. There's something I've come to believe about the way our choices catch up with us, not in any mystical sense, but in the very plain, functional sense that patterns repeat until something interrupts them. Derek had run from 2 landlords before he ran to my address. If I had let that work, there would have been a 3rd, maybe a 4th. At some point, the math stops adding up, and the fall is harder, not easier. What I did wasn't cruel. It was honest in a way that our family had never been with him. I think about Danielle sometimes. She took that piece of paper with the housing numbers without saying anything, and I don't know if she used it or hated me for it or both. I hope she's okay. I hope the baby is okay. My issue was never with her. What I know is this: intelligence without the willingness to act on it is just anxiety. I had read enough contracts to know exactly what I was doing when I wrote that sub-license agreement. But knowing wasn't enough. I had to be willing to follow through when it mattered, even with my mother crying in my living room and my brother telling me our father would be ashamed. That follow-through is its own kind of muscle. You build it by using it, you lose it by making exceptions every time it gets uncomfortable. And the integrity piece, that's the one nobody talks about enough. I gave Danielle those numbers. I made sure she had somewhere to go before I turned the thermostat down. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to win in a way I could live with. There's a version of that night where I called CPS to apply pressure and watched it spiral into something that hurt that baby in ways that had nothing to do with her. I didn't do that. I made the harder, slower choice, and I think it was the right one. My grandmother was right. You can love someone and still lock your door. The locking isn't the opposite of the love. Sometimes it's the most honest expression of it.